My name is Gloria Alvarez. I am from Guatemala. I am a freedom fighter all over Latin America. But also including Brazil and Spain. And because of this, sometimes I also get to spread the ideas of liberty in some parts of the US. Well, you see, most of Latin America is suffering from the same regional cancer. Basically, after the fall of the Soviet Union, we all had Marxist guerrillas that wanted to copy what happened in Cuba. You know, Cuba was the model. It was like, wow, finally some guys could put an end to the Yankee imperialistic ways of living, and Castro is the way to go. So we all developed Marxist guerrillas that started to follow Marx, because, you know, Marx said that through violence it was the way to acquire power and install communism. But when the Berlin Wall falls and the Soviet Union disappears, these leftist movements are completely out of resources. Plus, most of us were military dictatorships. If you look at Latin American history from the beginning of the 20th century till the 1980s, we all had military dictators. So there was no much political spectrum, you know. Obviously, communist parties were prohibited. That's why these guys, you know, had the Marxist guerrillas. But in the 80s, with the upcoming of a world without communism, we also had reforms and we started having democracies. Most of our constitutions, if you look at them, are from the 1980s. You know, granting us freedoms that we never had before, like, for example, first presidential elections and stuff like that. So naturally, right-wing parties starting getting elected in the 1990s, you know. Unfortunately, instead of opening the markets and allowing everyone to participate, they did a lot of mercantilism and crony capitalism, where only the few elite close to the president were allowed to be owners of these new businesses that were growing. So, of course, the mass populations became consumers. No one can deny that Latin America modernized itself and its cities became, you know, like world-class cities. Of course they did. But for the mass populations, they could only be participating in the market as consumers, not as entrepreneurs. This created resentment and class struggle, which united with the fact that the ex-Marxist guerrillas had to figure out how to survive in democracy. And so they did. They did the agenda of socialism of the 21st century, and because of the resentment of right-wing parties being corrupted and crony, people started voting for people like Hugo Chavez, Evo Morales, Daniel Ortega. So what you're seeing right now in Latin America is former Marxist guerrilleros being president. And then through democracy, which would be something that Marx would despise and say, no, that's not the way of doing things. Through democracy, they go to power and they start annihilating our republics and rewriting constitutions. What has happened in Guatemala? Well, in Guatemala, we hadn't had socialism of the 21st century governing, but then you have this leftist movements trying to, through civil society, to maintain discomfort in the country. So they make it really hard for companies to operate, especially if it's about clean energy or mining or anything that it's agrarian. They make conflicts, they manipulate towns to oppose this kind of stuff. Well, you see, because of this elite that had the power in the 90s and having mercantilism and crony capitalism, when Hugo Chavez came along, our entrepreneurs are used to giving money to whoever is on the top of the polls. They don't care about the ideology of the guy or if the guy is corrupted. As is commonly said, he might be a motherfucker, but I want him to be my motherfucker. So they give money to these kind of regimes. They are not there by just because. So they they trusted that Hugo Chavez, as long as they, give him money and let him be, he was going to respect private property, like all the right-wing corrupted presidents of the 90s. But surprise, surprise, that was not the case. So he started expropriating, and this was the first attempt. Then Nicaragua followed, Argentina, Brazil with Lula and with Dilma. Then you have Bolivia. Like the whole region, it started collapsing with this socialism of the 21st century. I tell you, is because there's poverty in Latin America and people fall for these populist promises. I don't blame the poor people. I think it's too cruel and too unfair to blame a woman that has 5 children, that because the politician gives her a bag of food, she falls into the trap and votes for him. It's too cruel. It's too unfair to say it's because of that woman that we're fucked. We're fucked because our elites haven't had the balls of defending free markets, of defending rule of law. Because Latin American elites, if you're born from certain class up, then you have everything in life. And the police is a suggestion, okay? And the Constitution is a suggestion. And the law? No. The law doesn't apply to me because do you know who I am? That kind of logic of if you are from the elite, then the system doesn't apply to you. So is our elites, political, economic elites, religious elites, academic elites, sports, arts, everyone with lacking this intellectuality that is needed for defending the right ideas. And when you have elites that are not educated, that are not willing to defend free market, and that are not willing to live under the rule of law, then they're going to finance the corrupt candidates that then expropriate them. Pinochet was the only military dictator that instead of, putting into place protectionism or import substitution, he said, no. We need free market, and I don't know how to do this, so I'm gonna have the Chicago boys tell me. And Milton Friedman was very specific to Pinochet, and he said, listen, if you don't open civil liberties, this is gonna backfire eventually. But Pinochet didn't want to listen, and also it has been completely taken out of proportion, because during the Pinochet era, 2,700 people got killed, versus a Che Guevara that only himself killed 17,000 people. But if you ask the regular Latin American who is a genocide, they're gonna say Pinochet. So what happened in Chile is that everyone started having this free market dictatorship, and everyone focused on creating wealth. As a result, Chile is the best country of Latin America with higher quality of life, less levels of illiteracy and malnutrition and all this kind of stuff. But the cultural battle was abandoned by these elites. They focused on making money, but they abandoned the battle of ideas. So what happened? The new kids that are born with money, and they don't study economics, of course, they think that the solution to give to the poor is let's redistribute wealth. You see it in the United States, all the Occupy Wall Street and socialism and Bernie Sanders. Rich kids that feel bad because daddy and mommy have money and I'm a privileged guy and I see that there are poor people, so my quick solution, because I don't study economics, is let's give to them. And this is what's happening in Chile. That's why you have leaders like Camila Vallejo and 100,000 students going to the streets demanding that education become free. Now, the voucher system that Milton Friedman imposed, that is the one responsible system for the fact that Chileans have better education than the rest of Latin America, where we have unions that rob everything. And now you see Chile wanting that system. It's like, guys, please study some history and economics, the fact that the right wing and the left wing had been completely disappointing for all of Latin America portrays a great opportunity for the libertarian movement to finally be noticed, not as the crazy minority, but as a political possibility. And I think that in Brazil, people have been very intelligent, the libertarian movement, in saying, okay, let's take the academics to the streets. Because what I've seen in libertarian movements sometimes is that they fight within each other, you know, like, oh, I'm more Randian. Oh, no, I am more public choice. Oh, no, I'm more Friedman. Oh, no, I'm more ANCAP. And it's like, guys, in the time that you are wasting fighting each other, our countries are getting fucked by socialism. So, of course, as a libertarian, I think you have the right of saying, I'm going to live in my John Galt Island, and I don't care if the world falls down. That's a choice. But if you don't like that choice and you want to actually influence in your country, you're going to have to be more pragmatic. And I think that Brazilians are demonstrating all of us how pragmatism can work and can actually create a demand for these ideas. So I really hope that they keep on that path, that they use social media, that they are true to the ideas. I think that the work of Marcel, for example, inside the Congress has been really interesting for other libertarians that have always seen that entering in politics is not an option. Well, I mean, I recently did a course on socialism for some people back home in Guatemala. The fact is that Che Guevara, first of all, he comes from a millionaire past. His grandfather was one of the most wealthiest guys in Argentina, as well as Fidel Castro's dad. Angel Castro did a lot of fortune, $8 million in the 1950s. That was a lot. So it's the same thing of why you see now millennials voting for Bernie Sanders. Che Guevara grabs a motorcycle. He goes all around Latin America. He sees Indians being exploded, countrymen being exploded by these companies. And because he didn't study economics, you know, there was no Henry Hazlitt around the libraries over there, he blames free market for why this exploitation is happening in the haciendas and the fincas and the factories of Latin America. And he goes in his motorcycle thinking, my gosh, these people are being exploited. And of course they were. Because when you don't have competitors, then you treat your labor force as worse than scum. But the problem with Che is that he detected the problem, but he couldn't see what was the root of the problem. The root of the problem was state mercantilism, was few people with monopolistic privileges to have industries. And he follows on all the way to Mexico with Marxist ideas, with seeing all these things, resentment in his heart, and he finds Fidel Castro. And by this point, Fidel Castro was not a communist. He just wanted to overthrow Batista because he was selling the country to the US. Also, in mercantilistic, protectionistic ways where only US companies had the privilege to trade. It's, we say in Spanish, the hunger met the willing to eat. You know, both things got together and they go back to Cuba, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and Che Guevara feels entitled to kill every single person that is not following the Marxist ideals. Actually, Camilo Cienfuegos, Uber Matos, people who helped Fidel to do the revolution, they were not communists. And they were like, wait, why are we doing this? This is not the path that we wanted to follow. And they got killed or disappeared in planes. So the problem is that people don't know that Che Guevara killed 17,000 souls. That Che Guevara said repeatedly in his letters to his dad, Dad, I confess to you that I love killing. Actually, Fidel made him Ministry of Industry and a chief of the central bank. And Che Guevara didn't like bureaucracy, okay? His thing was killing. So he said to Fidel, you know what? this is not for me. He went to Congo, then he went to Bolivia, trying to emulate what happened in Cuba. He had no success. Fidel Castro also abandoned him because he didn't like the shadow. So I think that due to the lack of a Latin American young leader that defends life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, everyone thinks of Che as the revolutionary. You know, it's like there is a demand in Latin American minds to have a t-shirt of someone that represents those ideals. And if we don't have no one from the other side, then Che Guevara takes that place.
So you would recommend to wear shirts like more Mises and less Marx?
Yes, or like this.
John Galt.
I got it, yeah. Who is John Galt? And it's like full of names of people who actually had, fought for this. What I say to young people is, listen, if you are up for life, if you defend life, you cannot admire assassins. If you are up for defending private property, you cannot admire thieves. And if you are up for liberty, you cannot admire dictators. So tell me, in this category, where does Che Guevara fit? Well, what I say to people is that the good and bad news is that it depends on us. You know, like I'm sick of the fact that people say, oh, let's see what the gringos do and then we will see what we do. Or everything, like in Latin America, we have a victim's psychological trauma where we think that if everything has gone to hell, it's because of the Yankees and it's because of the Spanish Conquista. And what I say to them is, listen guys, like 60 years ago, Japan didn't have the conquest of Spain or the Yankee intromission, which, by the way, every time the US has intervened in Latin America is because a Latin American has opened the doors. So let's take some accountability for that. It's not like the gringos come in and the whole country resists. No. There's always someone that benefits from that entrance. But that aside, Japan didn't have Spain conquering, it didn't have the Yankees, no. It had the freaking apocalypse, not once but twice, with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And those guys are not 60 years later saying, oh, gringos, it's your fault that we are poor and we are fucked. No, they started producing, they started working, they started taking their nation up. So what I say to people in Latin America is, if Japan could do it, without crying for a 60-year apocalypse, with what right we still blame Spain for our own issues? You know, it's like unfair. The battle of ideas. This is about fighting peacefully with ideas, debating. What I have found is that the Achilles, I don't know how you call it, the talón de Achilles, the flaw.
Yeah.
The flaw of the left is arguing, because their ideas fall. They have no way on proving to you that socialism works. So what we need to do is fight on that advantage. And on this is like Game of Thrones, okay? This is like chess. You need different positions. You need people on the horse, you need other ones on the tower, looking, you need other ones riding, you need other people in the halls, you need others that are messengers. So everyone is welcome. Objectivists, Randians, Friedman, public choice, stop fighting, grab your position and let's do it. It's the battle of ideas. It's the field that we're good in and they're bad. But if we keep on fighting with each other on who is more pure in the ideas, then our countries for sure are gonna be lost. And I think that's the only hope that we have. It's the battle of ideas, the one that shapes society.